Good evening. I'm Judy Woodruff. On the NewsHour tonight, crime and punishment. President Trump grants clemency to several high-profile convicted criminals. Then campaign shuffle. A new PBS NewsHour NPR Marist poll has Bernie Sanders on top and propels Michael Bloomberg onto the next Democratic presidential debate stage. Plus, crisis in Syria. Nearly 1 million people are displaced and on the run from bombings in the largest movement of people in that brutal war. And different by design, exploring a museum exhibit that mixes art and science to create a new sensory experience.
When we can offer experiences and opportunities that may change the way that they see and perceive what art is, what a great thing to be, to not be locked in a box.
All that and more on tonight's PBS NewsHour.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by...
On a journey with American Cruise Lines, travelers experience the maritime heritage and culture of the Maine coast and New England islands. Our fleet of small cruise ships explore American landscapes, seaside villages, and historic harbors, where you can experience local customs and cuisine. American Cruise Lines, proud sponsor of PBS NewsHour.
When it comes to wireless, Consumer Cellular gives its customers the choice. Our no-contract plans give you as much or as little talk, text, and data as you want. And our U.S.-based customer service team is on hand to help. To learn more, go to consumercellular.tv.
BNSF Railway. Colette. Fidelity Investments.
The John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, fostering informed and engaged communities. More at kf.org.
And with the ongoing support of these institutions. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
President Trump today pardoned or commuted the sentences of 11 mostly prominent people after determining they served enough prison time or were treated unfairly. This comes as the president has also sharply criticized his Department of Justice for its handling of the recent case of his longtime advisor, Roger Stone. William Brangham looks at the president's powers as they relate to delivering justice.
After serving about 8 years of a 14-year sentence, former Illinois Governor Rod Blagojevich was due to be released today from this prison in Englewood, Colorado. It marks perhaps the highest profile commutation that President Trump has issued since taking office.
He served 8 years in jail. It's a long time, very far from his children. They're growing older. They're going to high school now, and they rarely get to see their father outside of an orange uniform. That was a tremendously powerful, ridiculous sentence, in my opinion.
Blagojevich, a Democrat, was found guilty in 2011 of 18 counts that included seeking to sell an appointment to President Obama's old Senate seat.
So, Governor?
The conviction came just months after Blagojevich appeared on Mr. Trump's reality show, Celebrity Apprentice. In a state often known for corruption, 4 of its last 10 governors have gone to prison. Blagojevich's sentence was the longest for an Illinois politician. Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot today decried the commutation.
This is a man who was a governor of our state. He committed crimes as found by a jury of his peers. He's got to accept responsibility for that. President Trump is probably the least credible person to make this decision.
In addition to Blagojevich's commutation, President Trump today pardoned 7 people, including former New York City Police Commissioner Bernie Kerik, who served 3 years for tax fraud, and financier Michael Milken, who pleaded guilty to violating U.S. securities laws in 1990. All of today's announcements come after Attorney General William Barr altered the sentencing recommendation for Mr. Trump's longtime ally, Roger Stone. Stone had been convicted of lying to Congress and witness tampering and faced a possible 7 to 9 years in prison. Via Twitter, the president criticized that as far too harsh. Barr subsequently said the president's criticisms were making it, quote, impossible for me to do my job.
So for a closer look at the president's recent moves, I'm joined now by two former federal judges. Nancy Gertner was appointed by President Clinton and served as a U.S. District Court judge in Massachusetts for 17 years. And Paul Cassell. He was appointed by President George W. Bush and served as a U.S. District Judge in Utah for 5 years. Judges, welcome to you both. Thank you for being here. Nancy, to you first. Let's talk about the pardons and the commutations that the president issued today. 11 different people that sort of span an unusual political gamut. What do you make of the president's move today?
Well, in a regime that has been, for the past 30 years, an extraordinarily punitive regime, the pardon power is really critical. The clemency power is really critical and important. Most other presidents had a process for it, had standards, had a pardon attorney, had a process within the Department of Justice. I don't know that the president has that kind of a process, and the purpose of that process is to make sure that pardons are not doled out because of political influence or just celebrity status. So that is a problem with the deploying of this very, very important clemency tool. And the question is whether the people on the list today are the most deserving or just the most famous.
Paul Cassell, what do you make of this? I mean, certainly the president does have unlimited power to pardon people. Oftentimes, though, it does come into a decision about who is pardoned and when they are pardoned. Do you discern any motive behind the president's actions today?
Well, I think one good thing about the president's actions today is that he took them well before the next election. And so the electorate will have a chance to decide whether he's wisely using this presidential power to commute sentences, along with many other things the president is doing. Some of the pardon decisions in the past have been made by presidents on their way out the door. And so this one will at least be reviewable.
Let's turn now from these pardons to this question of this ongoing controversy within the Department of Justice. As we know, Roger Stone was convicted of lying and witness tampering, among many other things. The prosecutors in that case recommended that he serve somewhere between 7 to 9 years. President Trump strongly criticized that on Twitter. And Attorney General William Barr then stepped in and overruled that recommendation and said, no, that was far too harsh. Those 4 prosecutors have now all left and resigned from that case. Nancy Gertner, help us understand, is it unusual for an attorney general to overrule their line prosecutors in a case like this?
It is extraordinarily unusual. It's extraordinarily unusual to have main justice, the upper echelons of the Justice Department, intervene in a case involving the line prosecutors. Presumably, the line prosecutors, the 4 who resigned, would have reviewed their recommendation already up the chain. In addition, it's not just that he did it; it's also the way he did it. The notion that after the president tweeted that these were rogue prosecutors, Barr stepped in and called for a second memorandum, very public display of displeasure with the 4 prosecutors, asking, essentially rejecting their recommendation. Their recommendation, I might add, although I might have disagreed with it were I on the bench, was a guideline recommendation, was actually consistent with the federal sentencing guidelines, which Barr conceded. So it's very unusual. Usually what a prosecutor would do in a situation like that would be go before the judge and say, here's what the guidelines say. I understand, Judge, that you have a right to go below that. And that would have been communicating to the judge that the department really doesn't stand behind the guideline sentence, that in fact the judge could go below it. But what Barr did was a shot across the bow to other prosecutors, which was really troubling. That he would intervene when he did for someone who was obviously a political crony of the president is very troubling.
Paul Cassell, what's your take on that? Is this a shot across the bow where the president is clearly trying to intervene to protect one of his buddies?
Well, Attorney General Barr has said that he didn't communicate with President Trump in making these decisions. I think if the Attorney General can be criticized, it's simply because he's failed to keep these deliberations internal to the department. The U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Columbia was in a time of transition when the initial sentencing recommendation was made, and I think as higher-ups, including the Attorney General, looked at it, they decided it couldn't be sustained, and they stepped in to put forward a more reasonable recommendation, a more limited recommendation. It's interesting to see that this is a situation where a lot of people who typically decry the severity of the sentencing guidelines are somehow now opposed to the Justice Department trying to find a bit more leniency in a particular case. So I don't see that this has some kind of broader message involved at all.
Nancy Gertner, our understanding...
If I might, yeah.
Please, go right ahead.
Yeah, I mean, the question is whether or not Barr will intervene on behalf of other people for whom the sentencing guidelines were ridiculous, whether or not he would intervene to tamp down on mandatory minimum sentences, or whether this is a one-of. And if it's a one-of, then it is troubling.
Paul Cassell, our understanding is tomorrow there's a meeting of the Federal Judges Association, and reportedly this is a meeting of this group of federal judges who are having a meeting because they are troubled, reportedly, by what has been going on in the DOJ and from the president. Is that your understanding? And if so, do you understand the concern from judges at what is happening in the country today?
Well, I understand the concern about the president having sort of running commentary on ongoing judicial proceedings and specifically criticizing a judge by name. I think that's very unusual and certainly not something that I think is the kind of activity that we like to see from the president. On the other hand, though, I'm not sure whether the Judges Association is the best group in a position to make a criticism of what the president is doing. Judges are typically above the fray and don't step into what are political controversies. This has very clearly become a political controversy. It's clear that Judge Jackson, for example, who's being criticized, has no lack of allies among members of Congress, even presidential candidates who are running against President Trump. So I'm not sure it's really something that the Judges Association needs to step into.
Nancy Gertner, in just the short time we have left, what do you make of that? Do you think that judges should stay out of this fray and just, look, we're on the bench, we will make judges and decisions as we see fit, and let the political fray be the political fray?
I think that they can stand up for the institution. I think when the president makes the kind of comments that he did before a sentencing, sort of mid-proceeding, when he makes the kind of comment that he did trashing the judge who was hearing the case, and when he's making the kind of comments he did with respect to a political crony, the judges should well be concerned about the interference with the bench as an institution. Having said that, I doubt very much if they will say anything other than what Justice Roberts said when Trump was talking about, Obama judges, and something that would be very different than what the chief judge of the district court said when she said these are, independent judges who should be free to make independent decisions free from political influence. So
right.
That they're taking that position is fine. I don't think that they'll say much more than that.
All right, Nancy Gertner and Paul Cassell, thank you both very much.
Thank you.
In the day's other news, the coronavirus outbreak in China may be slowing, with new cases falling below 2,000 for 2 days running. But so far, some 2,000 people have died, including the head of a leading hospital in Wuhan, the epicenter of the outbreak. China is enforcing mass quarantines and stepped up surveillance, but the World Health Organization stopped short of criticizing those measures today.
What China are trying to do is, while they're getting success in putting out one fire, they don't want the fire to start somewhere else. Now, you can argue whether those measures are excessive or whether they're restrictive on people, but there's a lot at stake here. There's an awful lot at stake here.
Meanwhile, 88 additional cases are reported on a quarantine cruise ship in Japan, for a total of more than 540. That is the highest concentration outside China. In Afghanistan, election officials announced today that President Ashraf Ghani did win a second term in last September's vote. Results had been repeatedly delayed, partly by accusations of fraud. Ghani's rival, Abdullah Abdullah, rejected the outcome, and so did the Taliban. That, in turn, could jeopardize a U.S. peace plan with the Taliban. The United States imposed financial sanctions today on Russia's state-owned oil brokerage firm, Rosneft. The State Department said the company is helping Venezuela skirt an American oil embargo. It marked an aggressive move against both Russian interest and Venezuela's President Nicolas Maduro, with more to come.
There will be more steps and further pressure in the coming weeks and months. The United States remains firmly committed to the people of Venezuela and to the cause of freedom there.
The U.S. and other countries say that Maduro's re-election in 2018 was illegitimate. An appeals court in the Netherlands ordered Russia today to pay $50 billion for seizing the Yukos oil company in 2003. Yukos founder Mikhail Khodorkovsky was an outspoken critic of President Vladimir Putin and was jailed for more than a decade. Company shareholders have been pursuing compensation ever since. Moscow says it will appeal today's decision. A court in Istanbul, Turkey, has acquitted 9 opposition activists of aiding protests in 2013 in a bid to overthrow the government. Outside the court, supporters applauded, and some shed tears as the verdict was read today. They argued the case was part of a campaign to stifle opposition voices.
It's a great verdict. Acquittal was the only thing that could possibly be just. This is a verdict which should have been given more than 2 years ago.
Later, one of the activists, philanthropist Osman Kavala, was detained again. The Turkish state news agency said that he is suspected of ties to a failed coup in 2013. Back in this country, the Boy Scouts of America has filed for federal bankruptcy protection, facing a storm of sexual abuse lawsuits. Several thousand men have alleged that they were assaulted by scoutmasters and other adult leaders decades ago. The Chapter 11 filing lets the organization try to craft a sweeping settlement. We'll return to this later in the program. A fresh round of heavy rain is expected to bring more misery to parts of the southern U.S. starting tonight. New flood watches are in force in central Mississippi. Some neighborhoods in the capital city of Jackson are already underwater from weekend downpours. The new downpours could stretch from eastern Louisiana to western Georgia. The state of Alabama has declared an emergency. On Wall Street today, stocks slipped amid ongoing questions about economic effects of the virus outbreak in China. The Dow Jones Industrial Average lost 165 points to close at 29,232. The Nasdaq rose 1 point, and the S&P 500 slipped 9. And NASCAR driver Ryan Newman is reported to be awake and talking at a Florida hospital after a terrifying crash last night in the Daytona 500. In the final lap, Newman's number 6 car collided with the barrier wall, flipped over, and was hit by another car, and then skidded along the track in flames. Officials say that his injuries were not life-threatening. Denny Hamlin ended up winning the race for the second year in a row. Still to come on the NewsHour, new polling shakes up the Democratic presidential race. The re-election strategy behind President Trump's outreach to African-American voters. Nearly 1 million Syrians are on the move in the largest displacement of that country's civil war, and much more.
This is the PBS NewsHour from WETA Studios in Washington and in the West from the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism at Arizona State University.
6 of the remaining Democratic presidential candidates are set to debate tomorrow night in Nevada. And as Lisa Desjardins reports, there will be a new face on stage.
After mounting calls for Michael Bloomberg to have to debate his opponents directly,
I can't beat him on the airwaves, but I can beat him on the debate stage.
You're going to get a chance to debate him on everything from redlining to stop and frisk to a whole range of other things.
2020 Democrats will get their chance tomorrow night in Las Vegas during the 9th Democratic debate which will be Bloomberg's first. The former New York City mayor qualified for the debate after hitting 19% support in a new national PBS NewsHour NPR Marist poll out today. Another headline in that poll, Bernie Sanders has a hefty double-digit lead. Other Democrats, including those with strong showings in Iowa and New Hampshire, fell behind, like former South Bend, Indiana Mayor Pete Buttigieg, who criticized Sanders at a town hall in Las Vegas.
The politics that says if you don't agree with me 100% of the time, you don't even belong. That's clubbing people over the head, telling them you got to be just all the way over to the edge like us.
The in-person campaigning is battling a tidal wave of TV ads, especially from Bloomberg. He's funded a nearly $420 million ad blitz with his own fortune. Bloomberg's record has come under fire in recent days for his past comments on stop and frisk policing policies targeting minorities and his treatment of women at his company. Now, several news outlets have surfaced Bloomberg's 2011 NewsHour interview with Jeffrey Brown about a program for young minority men.
There's this enormous cohort of Black and Latino males aged, let's say, 16 to 25 that don't have jobs, don't have any prospects, don't know how to find jobs, don't know what their skill sets are, don't know how to behave in the workplace.
That's the other undeniable dynamic, the importance of diversity. Some 40% of Nevada caucus goers in 2016 were people of color, and candidates are directly appealing to them now.
Democrats are supposed to represent working people. Democrats are supposed to represent Black people and Latinos.
The hopefuls face off again when the state holds its caucuses this Saturday. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Lisa Desjardins.
And for a closer look at the results from that latest PBS NewsHour NPR Marist poll and what those numbers mean for the state of the 2020 race, I am joined now by Domenico Montanaro. He is the senior political editor at NPR, and we welcome you back to the program.
Thank you, as always.
So let's look at these numbers. Domenico, we're going to put the numbers of this NewsHour NPR Marist poll up. As we just mentioned, Bernie Sanders on top, 31%. Michael Bloomberg shooting up into second place. What do you see with these numbers?
Well, the key here, it's pretty remarkable. You see Bloomberg having spent more than $300 million. We're hearing over $330 million now from Ad Analytica. And what he's been able to do is flood the airwaves, quite literally, build his profile, and he's gained 15 points in our polling since December, the last time we asked that. He's leapfrogged right over Joe Biden, the former vice president, who had been, the far and away poll leader for a long time. And remember, when I would come on and talk about how national polls, they don't really matter all that much. You got to look at the states and those things will move. That's what's happened here. And you see Warren down, Pete Buttigieg really surprisingly at 8%, down 5 points after two very good showings. A lot on the line in Nevada and South Carolina for him.
It's interesting because Pete Buttigieg, just as one example, came in first, just barely ahead of Sanders in Iowa, did well right behind Sanders in New Hampshire, but that's not reflected here.
He is the pledged delegate leader, and he's at 8% in the national polling.
Right.
And the reason why national polls start to matter a little bit more now is because we're only a couple weeks away from Super Tuesday, March 3rd, when 14 states are going to hold contests. You're going to have more than a third of all the delegates at stake up for grabs in one single day. It really is like a national primary, and you have Mayor Bloomberg having advertised in all of those states, spending all that money, and he can do it at will because he's worth billions.
The other interesting thing, in fact, there are several interesting things to look at, but Amy Klobuchar, here's somebody who did better than expected in both Iowa and New Hampshire, but you see her in single digits in this.
Well, look, if you add up Klobuchar, Buttigieg, Biden, and Bloomberg together, they get to about 51%. You add up Sanders and Warren for that progressive lane, you're at about 43%. So you see that there's this filter where they're really sort of struggling to get out of each other's way. Klobuchar and Buttigieg in particular need to distinguish themselves because they've had a very difficult time breaking through with voters of color. You have two states in Nevada and South Carolina where overwhelmingly you're going to see way more voters of color, way more diverse states. 41% in 2016 in Nevada were non-white in the Democratic electorate, and in South Carolina, 2/3 non-white, 61% African-American. They're only at 4% and 3% respectively in our poll with black voters. They got to do better than that if they want to win the nomination.
Well, speaking of African-American voters, Domenico, former Vice President Biden was doing very well, has been doing very well in South Carolina. Here's somebody who was leading in almost every single national poll.
That's right.
And here you see now there have been a couple of polls, including this one out today, that shows him running third and at 15%. Now, this is a Nevada poll, which has him down a little bit, still in second place.
Right.
But how do you account for what's happened to Vice President Biden?
Look, Biden still has support of African Americans. In our poll, he has 31% of the black vote. Bernie Sanders, though, right on his heels at 28%. So margin of error difference, really, between the two of them. I think that's the most undertold story of this entire election, is how much Bernie Sanders has been able to win over voters of color, especially voters of color under 45. Voters under 45 generally, it's like no other candidate exists. He's got more than half of voters under 45 in our polling. And, you know, Biden was somebody who promised he could win over those working class white voters, and he couldn't do it in a place like New Hampshire, and it makes his electability case very difficult.
So much volatility, so much change, so much to watch.
Yep, absolutely.
Domenico Montanaro, NPR, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
While Democrats make their case to more diverse primary electorates, as we've just been discussing in Nevada and South Carolina, Yamiche Alcindor has been reporting on how President Trump is trying to make gains with black voters ahead of the November 5 general election.
A stepped-up pitch for black voters.
We're delivering for African Americans.
Just in the past few weeks, President Trump has touted what he considers his biggest achievements for the black community. Here he is in his State of the Union address.
African American poverty has declined to the lowest rate ever recorded.
In a speech on opportunity zones in North Carolina.
From the day I took office, I have been working to build an unlimited future for African American communities.
And a Super Bowl ad featuring a black woman being released after the president commuted her prison sentence.
I want to thank President Donald John Trump. Woo!
Only 8% of black voters went for President Trump in 2016. But the president's 2020 campaign is hoping to up those numbers. It is ramping up efforts to peel away just a percentage or two of black voters from Democrats in key battleground states. And the president is confident his economic message is enough to bring black voters on board. He told a crowd in Charlotte, North Carolina, that Democrats haven't done enough for African Americans.
They want your vote, and then the day after the election, they're gone. That's the Democrats. And I said, all these bad numbers, what the hell do you have to lose? Then I went off stage, and my people told me, I don't know, that's not nice. I said, no, it's true. It's true. What do they have to lose?
But some of the president's outreach to black voters has come under scrutiny.
But you know, I have some good news for you.
During his State of the Union address, President Trump awarded Philadelphia fourth grader Janai Davis with a scholarship, appearing to tout a White House initiative to support school choice.
Because I am pleased to inform you that your long wait is over. I can proudly announce tonight that an Opportunity Scholarship has become available. It's going to you, and you will soon be heading to the school of your choice.
But it turns out the money for the scholarship came personally from Education Secretary Betsy DeVos. Also, Davis already attends a highly sought-after charter school.
April McGord.
Allies of the president also held a pro-Trump event where they gave away a total of $25,000 to a mostly black audience.
Come on down to The Price is Right and get your $300, April.
Attendees praised the president after they collected the cash. And at the event, a White House official was awarded.
4 more years for President Trump. Yay!
The event was organized by a nonprofit called Urban Revitalization Coalition of America. A pro-Trump super PAC also gave the group a $238,000 grant. It is run by Ohio pastor Darrell Scott. He also co-chairs an outreach program for President Trump's re-election campaign dubbed Black Voices for Trump. A Trump campaign official told the NewsHour, quote, "These events are not affiliated with or sanctioned by the president's campaign."
And Yamiche is here with me now, along with Donald Sherman. He is the Deputy Director of Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington. It's a nonpartisan legal watchdog group. Donald Sherman, welcome. Hello to you. Yamiche, so let's talk about what we were just seeing, Donald, and let me start with you. Your organization has been looking to a few examples of the kind of thing the Trump organization is doing. Are there ethical concerns with regard to all this?
Absolutely. First, it seems like the president suggested that the scholarship for Janiyah Davis was part of a government program, but then we found out that it was paid for by the personal charity of one of his employees. We're also interested to see whether Department of Education officials were used in facilitating this donation, because then it makes it seem like they are actually grant officers for the Secretary's personal charity. In addition, the Urban Revitalization Coalition event is particularly troubling, one, because this is supposed to be a nonpartisan 501c3 charitable organization, and engaging in political activity like voter registration drives aimed at upping African-American participation for the president would violate IRS regulations for charitable organizations. Finally, it would be a problem for White House officials and other government officials to attend political events using federal funds. That would be a violation under the Hatch Act.
So, Yamiche, what is the Trump campaign? What are they saying about all this? And secondly, do they have a larger strategy? What is it to reach black voters?
Well, President Trump's outreach to black voters has long been something that has been criticized and controversial, going all the way back to 2016. This time around, the 2020 Trump campaign is saying that we're not affiliated with any of this. I had a long conversation with Katrina Pearson. She's a senior advisor to the Trump campaign and also someone who's working on black voters for Trump, Black Voices for Trump. And she says, look, even if this was part of the campaign, this looks like it would be illegal. So that's an admission on the campaign's part that there should not be cash giveaways at these events. But when you look at what the Trump campaign is actually doing, there are two things going on. The campaign itself, officials, surrogates of the president, they're talking about the economy, they're talking about school choice, they're talking about bettering the lives of African Americans and going around the country making that pitch. When you listen to the president himself, though, he's still going back to the 2016 question that got him into a lot of controversial conversations, which is, what do you have to lose as African American voters? He says his campaign thinks that that's not something that he should be saying, but the president said, look, I did better than both the last Republican nominees, talking about the late Senator John McCain and Senator Mitt Romney with African American voters. So I'm going to continue to do the things that I think will work. And as we saw in 2016, it worked.
Now, Donald Sherman, picking up on this, we understand your organization has been looking into something that Ivanka Trump, the president's daughter, did a couple of years ago in pushing for these so-called opportunity zones. Remind us what that was about and what's the concern there.
Sure. So the reason why we filed a complaint with the Department of Justice related to Ivanka Trump's role in pushing opportunity zones is because her husband, Jared Kushner, has a $25 million stake in a company that is packaging investment vehicles through the Opportunity Zone program. What that means is that Ivanka Trump's work for the Opportunity Zone program is essentially a conflict of interest that whereby this government program is funneling money into her pockets and her husband's pockets through this company that Jared Kushner still has an ownership interest in.
So that's an ongoing thing that you're looking at?
It's an ongoing thing that we've looked at. We filed a complaint with the Department of Justice, but we're waiting a response.
And one other thing, Yamiche, that we were just discussing, the president is one member of the president's cabinet, one of the few senior officials in his administration who is black. That's Ben Carson, the Secretary, Housing and Urban Development. He introduced the president recently, made a point of saying the president is not a racist. To what extent is it a concern of the campaign that there is this perception out there that the president is discriminatory?
Well, President Trump has done a number of things that have caused people to think of him as racist. That's, of course, critics of the president calling him racist. They say, one, that the president was a longtime birther, meaning that he was questioning whether or not President Obama was born in this country. That was seen as largely a racist conspiracy theory, given that President Obama was born in the United States. The second thing is the way that he's talked about immigrants. He said that some of them are rapists and criminals. He continues to use that language. The president thinks that that's talking from a place of strength and that he's being plain talking and talking
talking to a certain segment of the population that's worried about that. So there is this feeling inside the campaign that they need to defend the president's rhetoric, and then that's why you see someone like Ben Carson saying he's not a racist. That being said, there are also critics of the president who say the president isn't genuinely interested in upping his numbers with black voters. They say, critics of the president, that he's really trying to convince white voters, including white women who helped him win in 2016, that he's not racist. And by doing that, he's trying to speak to African Americans and look like he's trying to appeal to a broad range of people, when really what he's trying to do is really comfort a lot of the white voters that have gone for him before.
Understanding whether there's some calculation in all of this.
Yeah.
Yamiche Alcindor, Donald Sherman, thank you both.
Thanks so much.
Only one pocket of resistance to the ruling Assad regime remains in Syria. And since late last year, Bashar al-Assad's military, backed by Russia, has been pounding Idlib province relentlessly. Now, nearly 1 million people are on the move in the freezing cold and out in the open. As Nick Schifrin reports, in a war defined by displacement, this is the largest movement of people of the entire war.
They flee by the hundreds of thousands, 900,000 in just the last 2 months. But now, after 9 years of war, there is nowhere left to run. They arrive by the truckload at camps in open fields. Others flee to tents set up next to abandoned buildings by international humanitarian groups. This is their final refuge, pushed north by Syrian and Russian forces against the Turkish border. But the border is closed, and the internally displaced are trapped.
This is our 10th displacement. Now we are getting ready to leave, but to go where? We don't know. We couldn't find a house, so now we are just taking our stuff to the countryside. Maybe we will just sit under an olive tree.
Some have found temporary homes by olive trees, but the tents are thin and the winter is harsh. And here, the only way to stay warm are flimsy sweaters, and the only fuel for the fire are shrubs.
We fled from the airstrikes and we came here, and now we're dealing with the snow. We have no heaters, blankets, or mattresses, no firewood. We don't have bread. This entire camp is poor. We have nothing.
Last April, the Syrian regime and Russian military launched a major campaign to recapture Idlib province, Syria's last opposition stronghold. In December, the regime intensified its assault to recapture the M5 highway, the country's most important commercial route. Turkish forces are in Idlib resisting the regime, and Turkey has pushed Russia diplomatically. But those Turkish troops are preventing civilians from crossing the border. And yesterday, Syrian President Bashar al-Assad predicted victory over Turkey and all the regime's enemies.
The battle to liberate the Idlib and Aleppo countryside is ongoing, regardless of some of the empty bubbles of sound coming from the north, as well as the battle for liberating all Syrian soil, crushing terrorism, and achieving stability.
They lost their homes, their equipment, and everything that they have.
Fuad Sayed is the founder of Violet, a local organization trying to provide relief to displaced Syrians. He says the airstrikes are closing in.
They are so afraid from the everyday attacks or what will happen for them if the Syrian regime came to this area.
They have been destroying hospitals while the sick people are inside them. If he doesn't detain all the people, I think that he will kill everybody.
Saleh Hawa is an English teacher. His story is the story of the Syrian war. Back in 2012, he was a hopeful local council leader who helped lead an anti-Assad protest that pushed the regime from his hometown.
We are looking forward to a better future.
But then his town, Haritan, was bombed by Russian and Syrian jets. When we spoke again in 2016, gone were Saleh's hometown and hope.
Most of the population of Haritan left the town because there is no single house which is safe right now. We were let down. America let us down.
His hope returned briefly in 2018 when Turkish troops entered Idlib.
The Syrian people see that the only savior for them is Turkey. Maybe a few years ago they hoped that America would do that.
Today, those Turkish troops are still there, but Saleh says they cannot save the people of Idlib.
Does the international community accept that all these people are killed just because they wanted their freedom, their dignity, their equality? I'm calling for President Mr. Donald Trump, please do something. Please, I beg you. Now, more than 1 million people are going to be exterminated.
The U.S. supports Turkey's military presence in Idlib and has called Russia's involvement unacceptable. But last week, National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien ruled out any intervention.
So the idea that America must do something, I just find that to be, I don't even see that as being a real argument. What are we supposed to do to stop that? We're supposed to parachute in as a global policeman and hold up a stop sign and say, stop this Turkey, stop this Russia.
So all that Syrians like Abdullah Mohammed can do is try to protect their children. He teaches his daughter that when she hears airstrikes, she's supposed to laugh. He's lied to her that they're only toy planes. But the planes aren't toys, and the airstrikes are inching closer.
The Syrian people being killed, being bombarded every single day, their schools, their houses, their hospitals. The infrastructure is completely destroyed, and nobody is doing anything.
For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Nick Schifrin.
Officials with the Boy Scouts of America say that their bankruptcy filing early today is the only way they can deal with a growing number of sexual abuse lawsuits and still maintain scouting programs for current members. But as John Yang reports, it's a bitter pill for former members who were abused as young scouts.
Growing up in Florida, Juan Carlos Rivera loved being a Boy Scout.
I started to just learn everything about scouting, camping and doing the merit badges. Whatever scouting entailed, I was all over it because I liked it. It was fun.
By the time he was a young teen, he was a Life Scout, the second highest rank, and was taking art lessons from an assistant to the Scoutmaster.
And then one day he summoned me to go upstairs in the house to a bedroom, and that's when the incident took place. That's when everything changed.
Rivera says that was the day he lost interest in scouting and quit. For 20 years, he never told anyone why. He had been molested. Now he's suing the Boy Scouts of America and is telling his story publicly for the first time.
It angers me that it happened because it was a part of my childhood that should have been innocent. You know, I didn't seek it. It just happened.
Rivera's case is among about 2,000 collected by an alliance of lawyers called Abused in Scouting. They say each week brings as many as 70 new claims. The oldest client is 93 years old. The youngest, 8. Timothy Kosnoff is one of the attorneys.
More than 95% of them are identifying perpetrators that have never previously been identified. So it's an amazing act of civic responsibility to come forward. Most of these men have never disclosed this abuse to anyone.
In a statement, Scout CEO Roger Mosby said the organization sincerely apologizes to anyone who was harmed during their time in Scouting. He said the Boy Scouts want to use bankruptcy to create a fund that will provide equitable compensation to all victims. The organization's most recent IRS filing lists assets of $1.4 billion, including land for camping and hiking. The Scouts are asking the bankruptcy court to halt existing lawsuits and set a deadline for new complaints.
While it's unfortunate that these men probably won't get their day in court, or this will be their day in court, at least this means that we're moving forward and these men will get compensation and closure.
The Scouts follow more than 20 individual Catholic dioceses and religious orders and USA Gymnastics in turning to bankruptcy in the face of sex abuse lawsuits. Allegations of abuse in the Boy Scouts go back decades. In 1935, the New York Times reported on an internal red flag list of Scout leaders expelled for moral perversion. Last year, testimony in an unrelated court case revealed Boy Scout files from 1944 to 2016, listing nearly 8,000 men believed to have abused more than 12,000 children. Attorney Jeff Anderson discussed the disclosure on the NewsHour.
We have known they have been harboring offenders and keeping these files. We did not have the precise number until we got it from the expert on the witness stand.
Most of the names have never been made public. In 2012, an Oregon court unsealed documents in a sex abuse case that identified more than 1,200 scouting volunteers accused of molesting young boys between 1960 and 1991.
These are files that document the history of allegations of abuse in scouting and how the Boy Scouts responded to those allegations.
Legal and financial pressures on the Scouts increased last year when more than 20 states enacted laws changing the statutes of limitations for abuse cases.
This new law brings out information, exposure, and accountability that these institutions have been unable and incapable of doing.
Juan Carlos Rivera, now 53, never confronted his abuser and doesn't know where he is now. He still struggles with what happened to him that day nearly 4 decades ago. He says the Boy Scouts of America should worry more about that than its financial future.
They need to man up and do the right thing. I understand that they want to protect their assets. That's fine. But they need to put themselves in the positions of the people that were abused. Money is okay, but the trauma that abused people have, that's lifetime. That never, ever goes away.
Abuse allegedly suffered in a program whose stated mission is to teach young people ethical and moral values. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm John Yang in Washington.
And now a museum exhibition created by designers and brain researchers that challenges our senses by demonstrating how we all experience art differently. Jeffrey Brown reports from Dallas as part of our ongoing arts and culture series, Canvas.
It's a kind of playground inside an art museum. Large room-sized works in which exploring the different ways each of us experiences the world around us is as important as the art itself. Now at the Dallas Museum of Art, the exhibition is titled Speechless, Different by Design. It's unusual in that touching and much more is encouraged, even required.
I became interested in what happens if we do an exhibition where it's interactive, where we encourage people to use all their senses.
Unusual, too, in how it began, in a very personal way for curator Sarah Schluning, when her now 6-year-old son, Vaughn, was first diagnosed with an expressive language disorder.
Speechless is really quite literal in that he was speechless for the first several years of his life. And as we were navigating that as a family, we were trying to figure out, I'm a hyperverbal person, and what happens when the words that I use and how I express and communicate is no longer valid. And I think that led me into these ideas of what is disability? What does that mean? I didn't think he was different. His sister doesn't think he's different, but he gets out in the world and people didn't know how to communicate with him, and it was very frustrating.
And that led her to also rethink her work as a curator and how we all interact in different ways with art. For this exhibition, she asked artist-designers to bring those differences to life. Eni Archibong, a California-born, Switzerland-based designer, created an installation titled The Oracle. It's made up of 10 pill-shaped synthesizers crafted of blown glass.
Like you can feel, right, the reverberations in the room.
Museum visitors can move them, subtly altering the sounds in the room, even the color and vibrations of a pool of water. The console controlling all this Wizard of Oz-like is behind a wall. Yuri Suzuki, Tokyo-born and London-based, created Sound of the Earth Chapter 2, a large sphere that requires the visitor to experience it up close. Suzuki gathered audio by crowdsourcing on Instagram, with people around the world sending in clips of sounds of everyday life. Here, sound substitutes for visual imagery we might expect in a work of art.
And if I stay here long enough, I'm gonna...
Yeah, then you'll get we get sort of a hug.
Yeah.
Most playful of all, Misha Khan, a Brooklyn-based artist and furniture designer who filled a large room with strangely shaped sacks of hand-painted silk over vinyl, each covering a wood sculpture inside. And all of it constantly inflating and deflating, so the whole room seems to be breathing.
Everything's touchable and you can kind of explore it. And for me, I wanted to find a way to sort of embed these sculptures and humanize them by having them breathe and sort of shy away from you.
Not only that, you can jump in and take a seat, and so we did.
Because sitting is the idea here, right?
Yeah, well, I
mean, experiencing it.
Yeah.
You wanted to know if this would be perceived as a place to sit?
Yeah, and then like, if you sort of think of it as a chair, then what else is going on? And so it sort of pulls you into a different area. It activates your brain in a slightly different way.
Challenging to find that central sulcus on everybody.
And that is what Dan Krozik brought to the exhibition. Krozik is a brain researcher and deputy director of the Center for Brain Health at the University of Texas, Dallas.
We're essentially seeing how active the brain is. It's a heat map of areas that are particularly active for some kind of process.
In 2018, before the artists got to work, curator Sarah Schluning brought them together with scientists and medical researchers who study brain function, autism and dementia, and much more. Dan Krozik was one of them.
I was excited by the possibility because we don't often have these opportunities to have a science meets art kind of conversation. And I have long thought that especially visual arts has a very clear link within the brain. And when you're a neuroscientist, you tend to always think, how does the brain become active in these different ways?
Yeah. The artists then did their thing. The design team of brothers Stephen and William Ladd created this room from hundreds of rolled-up, colorful scrolls of all sizes, each made and initialed by a resident of Dallas or Atlanta. The room entices the visitor to touch and feel, or sit and meditate. Neuroscientist Krozik was able to explain to the artists how their work alters perceptions.
I think that the major message I try to inform them about is how dynamic the brain is, that we don't just perceive, we're constantly perceiving with a goal to act. And the brain is constantly cycling between perceiving and then acting. And so I thought there was a lot of exciting synergy with the way the brain really works because we always want to take the next action.
Why would this kind of art be more accessible to someone who we would call disabled in terms of what's going on in the brain?
It's changing the inputs pretty dramatically, right? And that's going to change the brain state quite dramatically. So the range of options, if you're more of a touch-based exploratory person, you're likely to get something very different out of these exhibits.
And that, of course, is the point of this exhibition, which even includes a so-called de-escalation room where visitors can relax with a weighted blanket after all the sensory stimulation. Curator Sarah Schluning hopes the exhibition can be part of a new model for museums.
When we can offer experiences and opportunities that may change the way that they see and perceive what art is, what a great thing to be, to not be locked in a box. It's okay to be different in the space, and you still can be surrounded and engaged in the experience.
The exhibition Speechless, Different by Design was a collaboration with the High Museum of Art in Atlanta and travels there next. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Jeffrey Brown at the Dallas Museum of Art.
On the NewsHour online, right now, 12 tapestries designed by the Renaissance master Raphael have all been returned to the Sistine Chapel for the first time in nearly 5 centuries. Take a closer look on our website, pbs.org/newshour. Later tonight on most PBS stations, Frontline examines the ascent of the world's richest man, Jeff Bezos, who is leading Amazon's delivery of endless products, entertainment services, and technology innovations to customers with just a simple swipe. But at what price? Frontline's The Rise and Reign of Jeff Bezos, tonight at 9, 8 Central. And that's the NewsHour for tonight on Wednesday from Las Vegas, a preview of the next Democratic presidential debate. I'm Judy Woodruff. Join us again here tomorrow evening. For all of us at the PBS NewsHour, thank you, and we'll see you soon.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by
Colette guides travelers to experience the world in more than 160 destinations across 5 travel styles like small group explorations. Their inclusive tours feature local guides, cultural experiences, meals, and accommodations. Since 1918, Colette has guided travelers around the world. Learn more at colette.com/smallgroup.
Fidelity Investments, American Cruise Lines, BNSF Railway, Consumer Cellular, Carnegie Corporation of New York, supporting innovations in education, democratic engagement, and the advancement of international peace and security at carnegie.org. And with the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
You're watching PBS.